In this video, we're going to be going over the stitching process, what the stitching process is, and when we would use it. Let's go ahead and start. When I'm building a file for the stitching process, I'll typically start the same way I would when I'm building any other file, with the exception that I prefer to build these at 125 dpi. Now, the reason why I do that is because ultimately I'll have to piece two halves or more of the image together, and I want to avoid a seam that's going to be a line that's visible where those two portions meet. It can be hard to completely avoid that, but at 125 dpi, I can burn it a little bit higher power so that it'll blend that a little bit more. So let's go ahead and we'll bring in our first file. Since this is a horizontal scene that I'm building, I divided it into left and right halves. So we'll start with the left half. And in the machine, it's going to be running sideways, so I'll want to rotate that 90 degrees before I go any further here. And that'll just be right up top. So you can see now the top of the image is to the left, the bottom of the image is to the right. I'm going to go ahead and, for speed and power for this machine in particular, I found that 18 speed and 21 power was working well for me. I'm using an interval of 0.0075. The general interval that you would set for a 125 dpi image should be 1 divided by the dpi, but I found that bringing it a little bit closer helps to just solidify my image a bit further. So we'll go ahead and set our laser origin. For stitching, I prefer to use a center down for my first portion, just so I can get it lined up directly on the center of the bottom edge of the stone, or in this case, the left edge of the stone, which is acting as my bottom edge. And we'll go ahead and download that in. Now, typically, we're going to be using the stitching process for materials that are oversized, something that's going to be a bit too large for the machine. In today's case, I'm working with a granite tile that fits within the machine's boundaries, but for the sake of demonstration, we'll be treating it as a larger material. So to get things started off, I'm getting my file loaded in for the left half of this design. I'll go to File, track down my file, and hit Enter. I also have the laser head moved over the direct center point of the left edge of the material, which we're treating as the bottom. And once this finishes loading in, I'll hit Origin to make sure that it's set there. There we go. So Origin, and then before I start my first half of my etching, I'm going to go ahead and hit Frame to make sure that it's going to be giving me a bounding box that covers the area that I'm looking for. Right on point. So at this point, we'll go ahead and start the etching. Okay, the first half of our etching is finished up, so I'm going to go ahead and move the laser head back. And now I'm going to take some masking tape and I'm going to do about 2 to 3 layers going right along this line so that we have a starting point for the second half of this. This will be something that'll help to, with any luck, prevent a seam from showing up. We'll get a slightly longer piece. And I want to be as exact as possible when I cover this. The reason why I typically would suggest 2 to 3 pieces of masking tape is 2 pieces should stop the laser if it does come past this at all. 3 pieces will for sure. Oh. And that's going to be the standard for any typical power for etching. So we'll line this one up directly on top of the first one. There's that. And one last layer, just to be safe. Okay, now that I have that there, just so I can keep a similar starting point, I'm going to bring this back. And I'm going to mark right where that red dot is at. There we go. The main reason why I'm doing this is because when you're dealing with a larger material and you're stitching, you will have to move it out of position and then move it back into position. This will help us to line everything back up properly. As a case in point, this I actually have pushed a little bit further than the machine can handle right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and move that out for a sec and go ahead and rotate that back into place a little bit further down. Now we'll be able to use the top edge of the etching to realign this, and then we'll take that center point dot that we created and use that for our new starting position. That should be pretty good there. And then I'm going to drop my speed just a little bit so that I can have slightly more finite control on here. There we go. And now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and load in our new file. For the second half of the image, I'm going to be loading my right half of the etching directly on top of the left half of the etching. So I'm still going to use the center down starting point that I did before for my laser origin. Let's go ahead and bring the right file in. Like before, I'm going to want to make sure to rotate that 90 degrees. Once again, the sky is going to be up here on the left side, the ground is on the right side. I'll still be using the same speed and power. Now, I do generally recommend when you're stitching that you try to run everything on the same day. That way, if there's any environmental changes that might change how the machine's operating, it won't be something that you'll have to deal with any changes in the overall etching quality. So we'll go ahead now and bring this one in. And once this is loaded in, we'll just want to have that lined up directly on that center point that we created after the first etching finished. So we'll get that loaded in. And then before we test our frame, we'll set our new origin point. There we go. I just want to get as close to the edge as possible to minimize any seams that might pop up. We should be set. I've hit origin to set that. Now I'll go ahead and hit frame to test my bounding box. And we should be good to go. So I'll go ahead and start our etching, and we'll see how it comes out. Now that our etching is complete, let's go ahead, lift up the lid, and take a look at the final product. So we'll go ahead and remove this. And it looks like we have a very small amount of a seam here, which would be caused just from the slightest amount of overlap. That said, though, this ended up being a pretty successful stitch, and this is the sort of thing that, once this is all fully highlighted, should blend pretty well into itself.